The sun had been falling for hours, a molten, sinking coin melting into the edge of the desert. Its last light spilled across the plains, setting fire to the horizon and painting the dust the color of rust and blood. Rowan Hale rode through it like a ghost. His hat was pulled low, shadow hiding the hard line of his jaw. The duster he wore was gray with sand, torn from too many years on the trail. His horse moved slow, hooves dull against the packed earth, one sound in the quiet, endless expanse. He'd been tracking her for 7 days. 7 nights of cold fires and old regrets. Evelyn Cross, wanted for robbery, 2 counts of murder, and 1 broken promise that Rowan didn't yet know about. He kept the bounty notice folded in his coat pocket, not because he needed it. He'd memorized her face, but because sometimes it helped to look at the paper instead of the mirror. The wind picked up, sweeping through the mesquite and the bones of the land. Ahead, a shape shimmered, a town crouched against the desert like it was hiding from the sky. Redwater, 6 buildings, a saloon, and a church with no bell. A place where the law had dust on its badge and the sinners had names he didn't say twice. Rowan slowed his horse as he entered the main street. People didn't look at him, but they felt him, the kind of man you didn't meet in the eyes unless you had to. A bounty hunter by his smell alone, leather, whiskey, and the faint echo of gun oil. He tied his horse outside the saloon and pushed the swinging doors open. The room was low-lit and heavy with smoke. Piano off-key in the corner, laughter that didn't reach the eyes. Men at tables playing cards and pretending not to notice him. And there she was, behind the bar, hair pinned up, sleeves rolled, moving with the kind of grace that came from trying to disappear. Her face was thinner than the poster, her eyes darker. But it was her, Evelyn Cross. Rowan didn't speak at first. He just watched her pour whiskey for a minor, laugh at something she didn't find funny, and move on to the next. When she finally saw him, her hands faltered, just for a heartbeat. Then she smiled, smooth as smoke. "Well," she said, voice low and steady, "if it isn't another thirsty stranger. What'll it be, cowboy?" He took off his hat. "Whiskey. And your real name?" "Miss Cross." The bar went quiet. Even the piano stopped, like the keys knew better. She set the bottle down between them, eyes unreadable. "Don't know what you think you're after, mister, but you've got the wrong woman." He slid the folded bounty notice across the bar. The wind caught the edge, flipping it open. Her own face stared up at her, drawn younger, colder. A name printed beneath, Evelyn Cross, 1,000, dead or alive. She looked at it, then at him. Her smile didn't break, but her voice did. "They drew me ugly." Rowan's expression didn't change. "Paper don't lie. Neither does the man who writes it," she said, leaning closer. "You here for the truth, or for the gold?" He met her gaze. "Doesn't much matter, does it?" A bead of silence hung between them, taut as a trigger. Then she poured him the whiskey, her hand steady now. "Drink, bounty man. The desert's cruel to those who don't rest their tongue." He drank. It burned. For a long while, they said nothing. Outside, wind howled down the street, rattling the windows like bones. Finally, she spoke again. "You ever get tired of it?" He glanced at her. "Of what?" "Chasing ghosts with names and prices." Rowan set the glass down slow. "Ghosts pay better than the living." Her laugh was soft, sad almost. "Then you ain't met the right ghost yet." He stayed longer than he should have. Long enough to hear her hum under her breath as she cleaned the counter. Long enough to see the small scar at the base of her throat, like a story untold. Long enough to forget the weight of his gun, almost. When he finally stood, she said, "You'll follow me out when I leave, won't you?" He didn't lie. "Yes." "Then let's save us both some trouble." She untied her apron, laid it on the counter, and looked him dead in the eye. "If you're taking me in, do it outside. I don't want to bleed on the floor." Something twisted in Rowan's chest. She wasn't scared, not even close. He nodded once. "Outside, then." The night had settled over Redwater, thick and cold. A lone lantern swung outside the saloon, throwing shadows across the dirt. She stepped out first, hands empty, the wind catching her hair. Rowan followed, hand resting on his revolver. For a heartbeat, It looked like every other arrest he'd made. The quiet, the stillness, the weight of decision between two heartbeats. Then came a sound, hooves, fast and angry. A trio of riders burst down the street, guns drawn. "Get down!" Rowan shouted. Evelyn dropped as bullets shredded the air. The lantern exploded, fire spilling across the street. Rowan dove behind a trough, drew his Colt, and returned fire. One man dropped, the other two peeled off. He glanced at Evelyn. "Friends of yours?" She spat dust. If they were, they just ruined the friendship. They ran for cover, down the alley, past the stables, out toward the ridge. Gunfire followed like thunder chasing lightning. Rowan fired twice more, hitting one rider square. The last fled into the dark. When the silence came again, it was heavy, broken only by the sound of their breathing. Rowan leaned against a post, checking his side. "You got a talent for trouble." She smiled faintly, brushing hair from her face. "And you got a talent for saving it. You gonna tell me who they were? Men who thought I owed them something." She met his eyes. Men who don't like when a woman says no. He looked away, jaw tight. "So what now? You tell me," she said softly. "You still gonna turn me in?" He hesitated, just a breath, but long enough to damn him. "No," he said finally. "Not tonight." Evelyn nodded, the faintest glimmer of trust flickering behind her eyes. "Then you'd better saddle 2 horses, bounty man. 'Cause by morning, the rest of them will come." Rowan looked out at the desert, vast, cruel, endless, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't know which way the wind would blow. He holstered his gun. "Then we ride." The stars hung low as they mounted up, 2 silhouettes swallowed by the horizon. Behind them, Redwater flickered with dying light. And somewhere in that darkness, the bounty poster fluttered loose from the wall, tumbling down the street until it disappeared into the dust. The moon rose like a silver coin dropped into the black bowl of the desert. Its light turned the sand to ash and the mesquite to bones. The 2 riders, one man, one woman, moved through it in silence, their horses leaving a thin trail that glimmered like smoke in the cold. Rowan Hale kept his eyes ahead. Every hoofbeat sounded like a heartbeat he'd buried. The wind hissed through the canyons behind them, whispering the same question that had been gnawing at him since Redwater. "Why didn't you take her in?" Evelyn rode a few paces behind. She hadn't spoken since they'd left town. Her silhouette was slight, almost fragile against the sweep of night, but she sat the saddle with the poise of someone who'd learned long ago not to tremble where men could see. When they reached a dry riverbed, Rowan dismounted. "We rest here." She swung down wordlessly, leading her horse to the trickle of water that shimmered beneath the moon. Rowan built a small fire, striking flint with slow, practiced movements. Sparks jumped, then caught, painting his face in shades of amber and regret. Evelyn watched him over the flame. "You light fires like a man who's done it in too many places." He didn't look up. Every trail needs light, and every light draws wolves. "Dang lachinkom." He poked the fire with a stick. "Wolves are easier than people." She smiled faintly. "You've tried both, have you?" He didn't answer. The fire popped between them, spitting tiny embers that floated up like lost souls. After a while, she unrolled a blanket and sat across from him. "So what happens now, bounty man? You plan to keep me on a leash till you decide if I'm worth more alive or dead." Rowan poured coffee into a tin cup. "You think I'm keeping you? Are you not?" He stared into the fire. "I'm giving you a head start. You don't strike me as the running kind, though." Evelyn's eyes softened. "Running's all I've done since the day I stopped being someone's wife." That pulled his gaze up. "What happened?" Her fingers tightened around her cup. "He died. Not clean, not quick. They made sure of that. The railroad men. They wanted our land for the track." He told them no. Rowan said nothing. "They came at dusk," she continued, voice low and steady. "I hid under the porch when they dragged him out. I remember his boots, the way the dirt turned dark under them. When it was done, they left me alive. Called it mercy." She looked at Rowan. "You ever been shown mercy, Hale?" He shook his head. "No, not the kind that leaves you breathing." She nodded. "Then you understand. Mercy's just another way to make you owe the world your pain." The fire cracked. Somewhere out in the distance, a coyote called, a long, lonely sound that carried like grief. Rowan leaned back against a rock. You killed them, didn't you? Her eyes met his, unflinching. 3 of them. There were 5. I didn't finish the job. That's why there's a price on you. That's why I'm still alive, she corrected softly. Because I wasn't done yet. Rowan studied her for a long time. In the flickering light, she didn't look like a murderer. She looked like someone who'd already paid more than the bounty was worth. Tomorrow, he said finally, we'll cut south. There's a trail through Devil's Hollow. Fewer riders will follow. She smiled thinly. Planning to help me escape? Planning to keep breathing. You could have turned me in back there, she said. Why didn't you? Rowan's jaw worked. You reminded me of someone. Who? He didn't answer right away. The silence was heavier than the desert air. A man, he said finally. My brother. I tracked him once, same as you. He'd robbed a bank in Kansas City, said it was for the cause. When I found him, he was half dead in a barn. I let him go. Her eyes softened. And 2 days later, he killed a deputy and 3 civilians trying to steal a horse. Rowan stared into the fire. I found him again, and this time I didn't miss. Evelyn's voice was a whisper. You killed your own blood? I killed what was left of him. She drew in a slow breath. So that's what you see when you look at me. Rowan's eyes flicked up. No, that's what I'm afraid of seeing. The wind shifted. The night grew colder, sharper. Evelyn pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. For a long while they sat without speaking, the fire dwindling to coals. Finally, she said, You ever think the world ended and we just didn't notice? That maybe all this, she gestured at the desert, is what's left of it. Rowan's mouth twitched. If it did, the devil's running what's left. She smiled faintly. Then maybe he's kinder than the men who think they serve God. The line hung there between them, bitter and true. Before dawn, Rowan woke to the sound of hoofbeats. Faint, far off. The kind you feel before you hear. He nudged Evelyn awake. We've got company. She rose instantly, eyes sharp, all traces of softness gone. How many? Too many for a coincidence. He kicked dirt over the fire, throwing them back into shadow. They mounted up, the horses snorting clouds into the cold air. As they rode out, Evelyn glanced at him. Still think this is about mercy? He grunted. No, this is about unfinished business. They rode hard, cutting through the canyons, the sunrise bleeding red across the ridges behind them. Bullets whined past once, then silence again. Rowan risked a look back. The riders were distant now, their dust rising like ghosts from the valley. Evelyn shouted over the wind. You think they'll quit? Not till one of us is dead. She smirked. Then they'll have to earn it. By midday, they reached a high ridge overlooking a sweep of dead grass and scattered boulders. Rowan called a halt. Both horses were lathered, breath ragged. He dismounted and scanned the horizon through his spyglass. The posse's dust was fading. We bought time. Evelyn wiped sweat from her brow. Time's just another word for distance in this country. He turned to her. You always talk like a preacher who's lost her book. Maybe I have. Maybe I burned it. He chuckled, rare and rough. You've got spirit, I'll give you that. She looked at him for a long moment. And you've got guilt. More than one man should carry. He met her gaze. Maybe that's why I can carry you. The air between them stilled. The wind died for a heartbeat. The look they shared wasn't of hunter and prey anymore. It was of 2 souls who'd found the same kind of emptiness in different shapes. Then she looked away. Don't mistake pity for love, bounty man. Rowan holstered his gun. Don't mistake survival for sin. They made camp again that night beneath the skeleton of an old cottonwood tree. The moon was thin as a knife, slicing through the clouds. Evelyn slept lightly, one hand resting on her pistol. Rowan watched the stars. He thought of his brother, of the law, of the quiet ache that came from choosing the wrong side of righteousness again. He wondered what the price of mercy would be this time. Out beyond the hills, coyotes howled, low and mournful, as if calling out names neither of them wanted to remember. The fire burned low, and the desert stretched endless in every direction. 2 fugitives, one wanted by law, the other by his own conscience, rode together through the ashes of the old world, chased by ghosts that wore the faces of men. And somewhere in that vast silence, between the steady beat of the horses and the whisper of wind through the sage, something small and dangerous began to bloom. Trust. Not the kind you could speak of, the kind you could die for. The storm rolled over the mountains like a herd of dark cattle, hooves of thunder shaking the distant ridges. Rowan Hale urged his horse forward through the narrowing pass, a spine of rock known by every outlaw and lawman in the territories as the Devil's Backbone. It was a graveyard of fugitives and fools, and he had no business being here with her. But he couldn't turn back now. The wind cut sharp as razors, howling through the stone like a banshee. Evelyn rode beside him, her face half hidden beneath a scarf, eyes narrowed against the dust. Her mare stumbled once on the loose shale, and Rowan reached across, steadying the reins. "Careful," he muttered. "This ridge doesn't forgive second chances." "I stopped believing in forgiveness a long time ago," she said, her voice barely rising above the storm. They pressed onward in silence. Below them, the desert fell away into a wash of ash-colored plains. Behind them, smoke. The posse was still there, following their trail, though the storm had swallowed their shouts. Rowan could feel it, though, the pressure of pursuit, the weight of death trying to catch up. They reached a ledge near sundown, where the cliffs split into a narrow gulch. Rowan called a halt. His horse trembled with exhaustion. Evelyn's lips were blue from cold. He found a shallow cave and coaxed a small fire from the brittle sage he carried. Flames licked at the wet air, stubborn and trembling, casting a glow on Evelyn's face. The firelight made her look almost otherworldly, fierce, fragile, and far from safe. She broke the silence first. "You've killed before." Rowan didn't look up. "So have you. I mean before the bounty work. You carry it like a man who's done worse things." He stirred the fire with a stick. The shadows flickered like ghosts across the cave walls. "War doesn't teach men how to kill," he said. "It teaches them how to keep living after." She leaned forward, eyes catching the flame. "You were a soldier?" He nodded once, jaw tight. "Blue coat. Gettysburg. I was a boy when it started. A corpse by the time it ended." He didn't mean to say it. It just came out, heavy and sharp as gunfire. The storm outside roared, drowning out the silence between them. Evelyn looked away, her voice soft. "I lost someone to that war, too. He came back a ghost long before he died." Rowan met her gaze then. "Your husband?" She nodded slowly. "Elias Cross. He worked the rail lines out west. Said he'd make a fortune building a path through the wilderness. The company took his sweat and broke his spine. When I tried to fight back, when I demanded justice, they sent men to burn our home. I ran. They died." Her voice cracked, but didn't break. "They called it murder. I called it the first honest thing I ever did." For a long moment, the only sound was the fire's hiss and the far-off cry of a hawk lost in the storm. Rowan stared into the flames. Justice. The word had lost meaning years ago. Men like him and her lived in the gray, somewhere between sin and survival. "You still believe there's a way out?" he asked. She smiled faintly, bitter as desert whiskey. "I believe there's a south. And I believe men like you don't follow women across the desert just for gold." Rowan didn't answer. The truth hung unspoken between them. The next day dawned pale and cruel. Ice clung to the rock edges, and fog crawled up from the ravines like breath from the underworld. They broke camp and rode higher, the air thinning, each step echoing like a drumbeat against the cliffs. Halfway through the pass, Rowan froze. Hoofprints. Fresh. He knelt, running his gloved fingers over the mud. The edges were still soft. 4, maybe 5 riders an hour behind. "They found us," he said. Evelyn's hand went to her revolver, instinctive, smooth. "Then we make them regret it." Rowan looked at her, this woman who'd lost everything and still stood tall. "You ever killed a man in daylight?" "Only when he deserved to see it coming." A grim smile tugged at his mouth. "Stay close. We'll use the ridge." They climbed fast, moving toward a narrow outcropping that jutted over the canyon like a jagged blade. From there, they could see miles, the dust plume of riders weaving through the valley below. The posse. 5 men, guns at their sides, riding hard. Rowan raised his rifle, eyes narrowing through the sight. The wind howled around them, tearing at his coat. His pulse slowed, steady, familiar. A sniper's calm. He squeezed the trigger. One shot cracked like thunder. A rider tumbled from his saddle. The others scattered, returning fire. Bullets sparked off the rocks, echoing through the canyon. "Move!" Rowan barked. They scrambled down the slope, shale sliding underfoot. Evelyn's revolver barked twice, sending echoes ringing into the storm. The sky erupted in lightning, painting the world in brief flashes of white and shadow. Rowan ducked behind a boulder, reloading. "You hit." "No," she said, breathless. "But I'll be if you keep missing." He almost laughed, but another shot screamed past, grazing his arm. He gritted his teeth, firing back. 2 men dismounted, creeping closer. Then silence, the kind that comes before blood. A voice shouted through the rain. "Hale, you hand over the woman, and maybe we let you live." Evelyn's eyes darted to him. "They know you." Rowan's stomach turned cold. "They should. I used to ride with them." Her breath caught. "You?" He didn't finish the thought. "Long time ago. Before bounty hunting, before all this." The voice called again. "You were one of us, Hale. Don't die for her. She's not worth the grave." Evelyn stood tall beside him, revolver drawn. "Don't you dare." Rowan looked at her, this outlaw, this wounded flame, and something inside him shifted, hard and final. "They're wrong," he said quietly. "You are." Then he stepped out from cover, rifle leveled, eyes like cold iron. The firefight tore the air apart. 2 men fell before they could reload. A third charged up the slope, shouting curses that drowned in thunder. Evelyn shot him square in the chest, her hand steady, her jaw tight. But the last man, the one who'd called out, reached the ridge. He and Rowan faced each other in the rain, both breathing hard, both ghosts of the same past. "You should have stayed one of us," the man snarled. "I did," Rowan said, "till I saw what that made me." He fired. The man fell backward, tumbling into the ravine. His scream faded into the storm. When it was over, the rain had eased into a steady drizzle. Smoke hung low, gunpowder mixing with the scent of wet earth and blood. Evelyn wiped her face with a trembling hand. How many ghosts does one man carry? Rowan slung his rifle, looking out over the ravine. Enough to fill a graveyard. They found shelter in an old church a few miles beyond, a burned-out relic clinging to the cliffs. Stained glass shards littered the floor, glinting like jewels in the firelight. Evelyn knelt by the hearth, wrapping Rowan's wounded arm in cloth. Her fingers brushed his skin, gentle, lingering a second too long. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered. He met her eyes. "Didn't I?" Something fragile broke between them then. The wall they'd both built to keep the world out. He reached for her, slowly, as if afraid she'd vanish if he moved too fast. Their foreheads touched. The fire crackled. For the first time in years, Rowan felt something like peace, brief, dangerous, and real. Outside, the storm finally passed. The sky cleared, leaving only a cold moon over the peaks. Inside the ruined church, 2 broken souls sat close beside the fire, knowing dawn would bring blood, and that the devil's backbone had only just begun to take its price. The morning after the storm dawned clear and cruel, the kind of morning that made the world look washed clean but left the heart heavier than before. Rowan woke to the pale light of dawn slipping through the cracked roof of the old church. Smoke still curled from the embers of their fire. Evelyn was sitting by the open doorway, her shawl wrapped around her shoulders, watching the mist drift across the mountain valley. She looked like something carved from the land itself, strong, scarred, and quietly breaking. Rowan pushed himself up, wincing at the pain in his arm. The bullet graze had scabbed overnight, but the ache went deeper than the wound. He watched her for a long moment before speaking. "You slept." Her lips curved faintly. "I don't think I remember how." He crossed to her side and sat beside her. Below them, the world stretched endless and golden. The plains, the river like a silver thread, and far beyond that, the faint shimmer of the desert. The border lay somewhere out there. Mexico. Freedom. Or at least a place where no one cared who they'd been. Evelyn whispered. It looks so close, doesn't it? Close, Rowan said, but never easy. She turned to him then, eyes catching the sunrise. Nothing worth running toward ever is. They broke camp as the sun rose higher. The horses were weak and hungry, the trail narrow and unforgiving. The devil's backbone wound down into a gorge where the rocks were red as rust and the air stank of sage and old bones. For hours, they rode in silence. Evelyn hummed under her breath, sometimes an old hymn or maybe a memory. Rowan couldn't tell. The sound made him uneasy in a way that wasn't fear. It was longing, something he hadn't let himself feel since before the war. At midday, they stopped near a stream. Rowan filled the canteens while Evelyn foraged through their dwindling supplies. We're almost out, she said softly. One more day, maybe two, before we've got nothing. Rowan crouched beside her. We can hunt. There's still game here. She shook her head. Game won't matter if we don't find shelter. You saw those riders. They weren't all gone. He knew she was right. Men like that didn't stop until the dirt took them. When he didn't answer, she studied his face. You're thinking of leaving, aren't you? Rowan froze. What makes you think that? Because men who stare at the horizon too long are always planning to run. He exhaled slowly. If I was going to run, I'd have done it before the backbone. Then what are you planning, Rowan? He met her eyes. To get you south. After that, I don't know. Evelyn's gaze softened, but her voice stayed firm. You're not built for peace. Neither of us is. That night, they made camp in a canyon where the moonlight poured like milk down the rock walls. The fire was small, barely enough to warm their hands. Evelyn sat opposite him, the glow painting her in flickers of gold and shadow. Tell me something true, she said suddenly. He looked up. Like what? Something no one else knows. Rowan hesitated, then said quietly, my brother. He was one at once, too. Robbed a stage line in Kansas, killed 2 men. The bounty was on his head, and I was the one who found him. Evelyn's breath caught. You turned him in? He shook his head. No, I let him go. Lied to the marshals. A week later, they caught him anyway and hanged him for murder. His last words were, you should have finished the job. Evelyn stared at him, her voice barely a whisper. And that's why you became a hunter. Rowan nodded. Because mercy cost him his life. She leaned forward, eyes glistening. Mercy didn't kill him. The world did. Their gazes locked. 2 souls worn raw by the same grief, the same guilt. The space between them was thin as a breath. Then she kissed him. It wasn't soft or tender but gentle. It was desperate. A collision of everything they'd lost and everything they still hoped for. He caught her face in his hands, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. The fire crackled, their shadows tangled on the canyon walls. For a few heartbeats, the world outside didn't exist. When they finally broke apart, Evelyn rested her forehead against his chest. If we make it across, she whispered, we leave it all behind. No more running, no more guns. Just the road and the sea. He wanted to believe her. God, he wanted to. But hope was a luxury men like him couldn't afford. By dawn, the posse found them. The first gunshot echoed like a thunderclap through the canyon. Horses screamed, rocks shattered. Rowan and Evelyn scrambled for cover behind the boulders. 3 of them. Rowan barked, reloading fast. Same bastards as before. Evelyn fired once, ducking low. I thought they were dead. They should be. Rowan growled, firing again. A man tumbled from his horse, his rifle clattering against the rocks. The others spread out, pinning them from both sides. Evelyn turned, eyes wide. We're boxed in. Rowan scanned the canyon walls. Too steep to climb, too narrow to run. Then we hold. They fired in bursts, each shot echoing like judgment. Dust filled the air, blood mixing with the red clay. Rowan's shoulder burned where the bullet tore through his coat, but he kept firing. When the smoke cleared, 2 men lay dead, and the last one crawled behind a boulder, bleeding, shouting hoarse threats. Evelyn turned to reload and froze. A second shot cracked from the ridge above. She staggered, her revolver slipping from her hand. Blood bloomed bright against her shirt. Evelyn! Rowan caught her before she fell, dragging her into the shadow of the rocks. Her breath came in gasps, eyes wide and wild. "It's nothing," she whispered, clutching at him. "Just a graze." But it wasn't. The blood came fast, dark too much. Rowan pressed his hand over the wound, voice breaking. "Stay with me. You hear me? Stay with me." She laughed weakly. You always were bad at lying." He looked up as the last rider climbed down from the ridge, gun drawn, blood streaked across his face. "End of the line, Hale," the man spat. "She's worth double now, dead or alive. You hand her over, and I'll tell them you died clean." Rowan's hand tightened around his pistol. His eyes were cold, calm, already past mercy. "She's not yours to take," he said. The man sneered. "Neither is she yours to save." The air went still, heavy as judgment. Then Rowan fired. The shot hit square between the man's eyes. He fell where he stood. Silence. Only the wind remained. Rowan turned back to Evelyn, his hands trembling as he cradled her face. "It's over," he whispered. "We made it." Her lips curved faintly. "Did we?" She reached up, fingers brushing his cheek. "You kept your mercy, after all." He shook his head. "Not mercy. Love." Her smile lingered a heartbeat longer, then faded. Her hand fell away limp. Rowan froze. The canyon around him blurred. All the noise in the world drained into nothing but the sound of his own heartbeat. He held her long after the sun climbed over the ridge, long after the flies came, long after the blood dried on his hands. When he finally stood, the light was gold again, that same cruel, beautiful gold that made everything look alive even when it wasn't. He buried her beneath the cottonwoods by the stream, wrapped her in her shawl. He placed her silver locket on the mound, still warm from her skin. Then he sat beside it until dusk, watching the last light fade. When the stars rose, he saddled his horse, turned toward the border, and rode on. He didn't look back, but every mile he rode, the silence grew heavier, the silence of mercy, of love, of loss. And he knew, deep down, that he'd never stop paying the price. The desert was endless. Rowan Hale rode through it like a ghost who hadn't realized he was dead. The sun burned low in the western sky, spilling light over a world made of dust and bones. His horse stumbled often, worn thin by hunger and grief. The saddle creaked like old wood, and every jolt sent pain flaring through the half-healed wound in his shoulder. He hadn't spoken a word in days. There was no one left to listen. Behind him, the devil's backbone lay far beyond the horizon. That cursed ridge where blood had been spilled, where love had been born, and where mercy had finally met its price. Ahead, the border shimmered in the heat. Mexico. Freedom. Or something pretending to be it. He should have felt relief. Instead, all he felt was hollow. By dusk, he reached a ghost town. The place was nothing but skeletons of buildings, half-collapsed roofs, doors creaking on broken hinges, windows like blind eyes staring out at the dying light. The sign hanging by one nail still read Prospect Hollow. Rowan dismounted slowly, boots crunching in the sand. The town smelled of old smoke and rot, the remnants of lives long gone. Somewhere, a windmill turned lazily, creaking in the wind. He led the horse to a trough half filled with muddy rainwater. The animal drank greedily. Rowan watched, one hand resting on the worn butt of his revolver, a habit he couldn't shake even now. Inside the old saloon, dust floated like ash through the dying light. A few bottles still sat on the shelf behind the counter, empty and cobwebbed. The piano in the corner was missing half its keys. He poured himself a glass from one of the bottles, though the whiskey tasted like rust and time. He drank anyway. It burned the way he needed it to. He sat there for a long while, staring at nothing. The silence of the place pressed down around him, heavy, endless. Finally, he spoke aloud. "She's gone." The words hung in the air like smoke. He said it again, quieter this time, as if trying to convince himself. "She's gone." Outside, the wind answered with a low, lonely whistle through the cracks in the walls. By the time the moon rose, a new sound broke the quiet, hoofbeats. Distant at first, then closer. Rowan stiffened, his hand drifting to his revolver. Through the saloon's doorway, he saw them emerge from the desert. 3 riders, their silhouettes black against the silver light. Not the law, not bounty men either. These were soldiers, or close enough. The lead rider called out as they stopped in the street. "Rowan Hale." Rowan stepped into the doorway, the shadows cutting across his face. "You found him." The man on horseback was middle-aged, wearing a gray duster and a tin badge dulled by dust. "Marshal Garrett, you're a hard man to track." "Didn't try to be," Rowan said. Garrett swung down from his horse, boots sinking into the sand. "Word reached us about a week ago. Said you shot down 4 bounty riders near the backbone. Said you were traveling with Evelyn Cross." Rowan's jaw tightened at her name. Garrett's gaze softened, but only slightly. "She was wanted for 3 murders, Hale. You know that." "She was wanted for surviving," Rowan said, voice low. "That's not the same thing." Garrett sighed. "Maybe not, but the law don't see the difference." He paused, then nodded toward Rowan's gun belt. "You know how this ends." Rowan looked down at his revolver, black steel glinting in the moonlight. His reflection wavered in it, ghostly and tired. "I buried her by the river," he said. "Didn't mark it with her name. She didn't want one." Garrett watched him quietly. "You can still ride south, Hale. Pretend none of this ever happened. The border's only a day away." Rowan shook his head slowly. "I've been running my whole damn life. Not anymore." He unbuckled his gun belt and let it drop into the dust. The sound it made, a dull, final thud, echoed louder than gunfire. Garrett stared at him, surprise flickering in his eyes. "You're giving up?" Rowan looked past him, toward the empty horizon. "No, just laying down what's left." The marshal stepped closer, his voice quiet. "You know what they'll do, Rowan? You walk back with me. They'll hang you same as they would her." Rowan nodded. "I know." Garrett's gaze lingered on him, seeing the exhaustion, the peace, the quiet resignation of a man who had nothing left to lose. "Why then?" Rowan looked up at the stars. "Because somebody's got to stop running first. Might as well be me." They left at dawn. The desert stretched endless ahead of them, golden and silent under the new light. Rowan rode without chains, his hands free, his eyes fixed on the horizon. The other men said nothing. Even the marshal stayed quiet. As they passed the riverbank, Rowan asked for a moment. Garrett hesitated, then nodded. Rowan dismounted, walking to the edge where the cottonwoods grew. The grave was still there, small, simple, marked by a mound of sun-baked earth and the locket he'd left behind. The silver had tarnished in the heat, but the engraving still showed, E.C. He knelt, brushing dust from the locket with his thumb. The sun caught it for a heartbeat flashing gold. "I made it south," he whispered. "Just like you said." The wind stirred through the branches, soft, almost tender. For a moment, he could swear he heard her voice in it. "You kept your mercy, after all." He smiled faintly, though his eyes burned. "You were wrong about one thing," he said quietly. "It wasn't mercy. It was you." Then he stood, turning back toward the waiting riders. By the time they reached Fort McAllen, the sky was the color of ashes. The soldiers took his horse, his coat, his name. Inside the wooden stockade, they gave him a cot and a cup of water and asked if he had any last words for the record. He thought for a moment, then said, "Tell them I found what I was hunting." The guard frowned. "And what was that?" Rowan smiled faintly. "Peace." They hanged him at sunrise 2 days later. No one came to watch except Marshal Garrett. He stood beneath the scaffold, hat in hand, head bowed. When it was over, the marshal buried Rowan Hale beside the walls of the fort. No stone, no marker, just a patch of bare earth under a desert sky. Before he rode away, Garrett took the locket from his pocket, the same one he'd found in Rowan's hand at the riverbank, and laid it on the grave. It caught the morning light, glinting once before settling into the dust. Years passed. The desert swallowed what remained. The fort fell silent, the graves forgotten. But sometimes travelers said that when the wind blew right across the plains, you could still hear hoofbeats echoing out of the devil's backbone, slow, steady, fading west. Some said it was a ghost. Others said it was just the wind. But the old-timers in the border towns, the ones who remembered Rowan Hale and the woman he'd died for, told it different. They said it wasn't a haunting, it was a promise. A promise that somewhere, between sin and salvation, mercy still rode. And that's how the story ended, not with the crack of a gun, but with a whisper in the wind. Because some debts can't be paid in gold or blood, only in the hollow between guns.